Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Gita class, Sunday's Gita class, with some mantras. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamrit Varshini Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Amatvam Anusandhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini नमो अस्तुते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे फुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञान मया प्रदीपः परपान पारी जाताये तोत्र वेत्र एक पाने ज्ञान मुद्राए कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव वसुतम देवम कंस चानूरमर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगद्गुरुम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्राहवती कृपेन वाहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सो तीर्ना खलु पांडवै रन नदी के वर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थगंधोटकम नाना ख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदय रह रह पेपिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिम यत्कृपात्मं वंदे परमानंद माधवम यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मर्तः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदै सांग पद क्रमोपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामगा ज्ञानवस्ति तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुसुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. So last Sunday we started this chapter 13 and the title of this chapter is Kshetra Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yog. And I told you that first verse where Arjun is asking a question about these terms which Lord Krishna has been using: Prakriti, Purush, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnanam, Gyayam. So in some of the books, this verse is missing. So, and we ended the class with the second verse, which is like a verse number 1 in your book. So in this chapter, just keep track of these verses. If I just don't mention it a few times, I don't want you to get lost. Okay. So this first verse in your book, Lord Krishna starts to answer Arjun's question. In fact, rest of the chapter is where he is explaining in detail these terms. So in this verse he says, this body, O Kaunteya, is called the Kshetra. That means the field. And he who knows it is called Kshetrajna, the knower of the field. By those who know them, that is, they know Kshetra and Kshetrajna, and those are the sages actually, who know them, who have this knowledge. The people who have discerned this truth. So this is where we ended last week's class. Now let's look at the next verse. Kshetrajnam cha api mam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharat kshetra kshetrajyo jnanam yat tat jnanam matam mam. Kshetrajnam, the knower of the field. Cha means and, api also, mam, me, vidhi, no, sarva kshetreshu, in all the fields. And Bharat is the term used for Arjun. Kshetra kshetrajyo, of the field and of the knower of the field. Jnanam, knowledge. Yat means which, tat means that. Jnanam, knowledge. Matam, considered to be. Mam means my. Know me as the knower of the field in all the fields, O Bharat. Knowledge of the field, as also of the knower of the field, is considered by me to be my knowledge. So last time I mentioned that soul is the knower of the individual field. like our body. And the God is the knower of the fields of all the souls. Okay, that's why it's called a supreme soul. So in all fields, the knower is the one. So that's why the polarity is only in the matter. Okay, the life that presides over all of it is one everywhere. So that means God is one. So this universal one, the transcendental truth, is indicated here by a first person singular by Lord Krishna as I am. I am. And that's where we use that term soham also. That I am, soham. So Lord Krishna is expounding the Gita in a rare moment of yogic integration. This is called a yoga rude state, or yoga rude avastha. So he is identifying himself with the self that is everywhere. In this moment, if you get a chance to study Mahabharata, you will find out that Arjuna, after winning that war and returning to Hastinapur, one day he requested Lord Krishna to repeat the Gita. And the Lord Krishna admitted that he could not do so with the same efficiency as he did in the battlefield. He said, I was then in a full state of yoga. Okay, from that state he was talking about. So when he said, I am, this I is like a oneness with the Brahman. So Lord Krishna declares that according to him, a correct knowledge of what constitutes in each one of us the perishable, changeable, finite, inert matter, and the nature of the infinite, imperishable, sentient spirit is the supreme knowledge. So right now, just remember, Kshetra is the field of matter. And this is constituted of the various equipments of perceptions, vast fields of the perceived also. And Kshetrajna is the subject that enjoys the activities of the instruments of perception. So Kshetra and Kshetrajna. Then in the next verse he says that Kshetram yat cha yadrik cha yadvikar yata cha yat sa cha yat prabhava cha tat smasen me shrinu. That means that Kshetram field, yat means which, cha and yadrik, like what? Yadrik. Yad vikar, what its modifications? Yataha, where, cha means and, yat means what? Sa, he, cha means and, yahu, yat prabhava, what is his powers? That means that, samasen, in brief, may from me, shrinu, here. So Lord Krishna is saying what that field is, of what nature it is, what are its modifications, where it is, and also who he is, and what his powers are. These hear from me in brief. Okay, so over here he says I am going to talk more about it because he just only indicated in the last couple of verses. So now he says, I'll tell you more of what nature. That means that what are its properties? And where is what meaning? What effects arise from what cause? That means that what are the byproducts when it changes its form? And what is its origin? Who is he? The knowing principle in this field, which knows this field. And what are his powers of perception, feeling, and thoughts? He says, hear this all briefly from me. So we need all this working knowledge. If we think that we are the Atma, which is part of the Paramatma, and we feel bondaged, so we got to know, how did we get bondaged? What is it that binding us? Because we got to find the ways to free ourselves. So that's why all this detail is important. So to know the nature of all the Prakriti envelopments, because it's playing on us. So we got to know how they are playing. How do they behave under given sets of different circumstances? That's what we need to know about field. We will be successful only when we release ourselves from this bondage. Only then we are free. So Lord Krishna is emphasizing the importance of a close study of a field provided by the Prakriti. See, this is the knowledge he's giving it to us. Knowledge is always very appealing to intellect, but only when it is expressed with precision and clarity. And there has to be a sound logic behind it too. And it must be confirmed by some higher authority. So that's why Lord Krishna tells us that sages say that, Vedas say that. In the next verse, we'll see that he's using the word rishis, Brahma Sutra Padai. So reference for validating spiritual knowledge is the Vedas. They got the highest authority. Vedas are called the Apurusha. That means they were not created by any human being. Manu Samriti itself says, Bhutam Bhavyam Bhavishyam Cha Sarvam Vedat Parasiddhyate. Manu Samriti. Any spiritual principle must be validated on the authority of the Vedas. So Lord Krishna himself is using this authority. He says, Rishi bhi bahuda gitam, chando bhi vividhe prithak, Brahma sutra padecha eva, hetu madhi vinishyate. Rishi bhi, by the rishis, bahuda, in many ways, gitam, sang, chando bhi, in chants, vividhe, various, prithak, distinctive. Brahma sutra padai, in the suggestive words indicative of Brahma. Cha means and, Ev means even, Hetu Madhi, full of reasoning. See, Hetu means reasoning. Vinishchitai, decisive. Rishis have sung, that means they have sung about the field and the knower of the field, Kshetra and Kshetrajna. In many ways, in various distinctive chants, and also in the suggestive words indicative of Brahma, full of reason and decision. Is saying that explanations that which is going to be given by him is not just an idle talk or just a clever intellectual springing from the imagination of his own mind only. In the entire discourse, Lord Krishna assures us that what he explains is only a healthy restatement of what has been sung by the rishis in many ways, in different hymns, in different places. So in other words, the subject matter dealt with here is the very theme which the Upanishads have indicated in their verses, in the various passages about Brahma. And why should we so readily accept the statements of the rishis in the Upanishads? This is what he's pointing out even over here, that these are the divine commandments, and these declarations are full of reasoning, and that's why they are so convincing. It's not just Upanishad said it and you believe it. There's a reasoning given behind it. And then if you follow what they tell you, you will experience it also. It will be your experience also. We should not just stop by accepting that it was some rishi's experience. They tell us exactly the techniques they give us so that we can experience also. When a truth is declared along with the logical reasoning, the conclusion arrived is very easy to accept by any intelligent student. This is like a sheer force of the appeal. So now in the next couple of verses, we'll see Lord Krishna is enumerating the various items which constitute the field. So he did not just say that this body is the field. Okay, he did not stop it there. Now he is further going into the detail. What does he really mean when he says idam shriram, this body? What is this idam sharir? Mahabhutani ahankara, buddhi avyaktam evcha, indriyani dash ekam cha, pancha cha indriye gochara. Next verse, continuation of this. Icha, dvesha, sukham, dukham, sanghata, chetna, dhriti, etat, kshetram, samasena, savikaram, udaharitam. Mahabhutani, in great elements. Ahankar, egoism. Buddhi, intellect. Avyaktam, the unmanifested. That means the mool prakriti, unmanifest. Ev means even, cha means and. Indriyani, the senses. Dash means 10, ekam means 1, cha means and, pancha 5, cha and, indriye gochara, objects of the senses. So the great elements, and we are all familiar with the great elements, those panchabhut, egoism, intellect, and also the unmanifested, mool prakriti. The 10 senses and the one, that means the mind, and the 5 objects of the senses. The next verse, ichha means desire, dvesh means hatred, sukham pleasure, dukham pain, sanghata the aggregate, chetana the intelligence, dhriti the fortitude, the will, etat this, kshetram field, samasen briefly, that means briefly comprised of, samasen, savikaram with modifications. Vikar means modification. So savikar with modifications. Udahritam has been described. Desire, hatred, pleasure, pain. Aggregate. That means body. Intelligence, fortitude. This kshetra has been briefly described with its modifications. So these 2 verses enumerate the various items together, constituting the field. Okay, idam sharira. So let's look at, I think most of these terms you are familiar with, but let's go through it for further clarification. So Mahabhut, the great elements, they are 5 in number. Space, air, fire, water, earth. They are called the rudimentary elements of the combinations of which the grosser elements indicated here. Okay. When he says the perceptible, that means indriya gocharaha. So great elements are formed. The egoism, ahankar. This is the sense of I-ness or my-ness, which arises in us in our identification with the world of objects. My house, my. The individuality arising out of our relationships with the world of matter is called the ego. Buddhi, intellect, that is the determining faculty which rationally thinks. And because of buddhi, we come to our conclusion. We judge something good or bad, every experience of our life through buddhi, the intellect. Avyakt, unmanifested. Avyakt is that really rules the functions of a given mind and intellect, avyakt. This unmanifested is also called vasanas. The impressions which were left behind in our mental equipment as a result of our conscious enjoyment, or it could be suffering. Okay, avyakta. Vasana. So it's like a microcosmic aspect in our own particular universe, unmanifested in the form of vasana. Okay, and in Sanskrit it's called mool prakriti, the root of all this. The supreme functioning through the maya. For supreme, it's a mool prakriti is maya. But for the individual, it's the vasanas. So the creator of the total universe is functioning through the maya. For us, it becomes avidya also, whether it's a vasana or avidya. The ignorance is the same thing. And then he says the 10 senses, the 5 sense organs of perception, which is called Gyanindriya, and 5 organs of actions, the Karmendriya. These are the vehicles by which all of us perceive the stimuli and do the response also. Because we constantly respond accordingly through the senses. Ekam, the one. So in this context, this stands for the mind. Because mind not only receives the stimuli, but it also executes the judgment of the intellect. Because intellect judges, but that mind is the one which executes. So one is the mind. Then he says 5 objects of the senses. Objects. Each sense organ. See, we have the 5 sense organs. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the touch, and the taste. Each sense organ has only one definite field of sense object to perceive. Eyes can perceive only form, and ears can only listen to the sounds. The nose can only smell, tongue can only taste, and skin can only perceive the touches. So these are the objects he's talking about. No one of the sense organs can perceive the objects of the other sense organs. So there are 5 distinct types of sense organs, sense objects. In fact, the entire gross world perceived is nothing other than the play of all these 5 types of sense objects. So far, 24 factors he has enumerated. These are called the 24 tattva, or the principles, in the Sankhya philosophy also. And then he mentions Ichha, the desire. This is a function of the mind and the intellect, which creates a longing for the acquisition of an object, a situation, or even a person. Desire. So all of this, he says, is this body. So the knowable is labeled as the field, knowable, and the knowing principle, he says, is the knower. Okay, so Kshetrajna. So knowing principle is the knower, and the knowable is the Kshetra. Because sometimes these words, they just confuse our mind. So we got to just be clear about this. We'll see that the next section, that section is like a 5 verses together. We'll see the 20 qualities in totality indicate the knower. So in these 2 verses, he talked about the field, the Kshetra. The next 5 verses, the Kshetrajna. See, if we study this chapter like this, in sections, it becomes very easy to understand. Otherwise, there are so many terms over here, and it can be very confusing for a new student especially. So I want you to just look at these 2 verses as a Kshetra, and next 5 verses, qualities which are help us to know the Kshetrajna. So the knower of the field is directly described in verse number 12 then. Write it down. When we reach there, you will know it. Knower of the field. But in the following concepts, certain mental and intellectual attributes, some moral attitude, some ethical principles, that's what he is prescribing in these 5 verses. Because they are the essential prerequisites for the seeker. Any seeker who is anxious to know, we got to be ready to know the Atma. Otherwise, Atma or the soul or Paramatma, all these terms, we say it all the time, but we really don't understand it. So he says, cultivate these qualities. Ethical, moral qualities. So to gain knowledge of the Kshetra and Kshetrajna is not just an intellectual exercise. The spiritual knowledge Lord Krishna is talking about definitely requires purification of the heart. And what is a heart? Heart is in the philosophical terms, heart is the apparatus, inner apparatus of our mind and intellect. So that means we got to cultivate these virtues in order to purify our mind and intellect. And we'll see that our habits, our behaviors, our attitudes, we got to work on those. So that this light of knowledge is illuminated inside us. Okay, let me go through at least one verse over here. You will see that some of these words you are familiar with. But we got to see that, is it only theoretically we know those words, or are we living by these qualities or not? Amanitvam, adambhitvam, ahimsa, kshanti, arjavam, acharya upasanam shocham, sathairyam atam vinigraha. Amanitvam, that means a humbleness. See, aman, humility, humbleness. Adambhitvam, freedom from hypocrisy. No dambh, unpretentiousness. Ahimsa, non-violence, non-injury. Kshanti, forgiveness. Arjavam, uprightness, simplicity. Arjavam. Acharya upasanam, service to the Guru. Acharya. Shocham, purity. Sathairyam, steadiness. Atam vinigraha, self-control. So humility, unpretentiousness, non-injury, forgiveness, uprightness, service to the Guru, purity, steadfastness, self-control. So again, from this verse onwards, we get a description of the elements of the knowledge, so that we can cultivate moral qualities, or ascetic practices actually, which are conducive to our spiritual awakening. The very first one, humility. Sometimes this pride comes in us because of certain talent, physical beauty, intellect, physical strength. We just become so proud of ourselves, and we make ourselves far from the reality, the God, or we distance ourselves. It is a big obstacle on the path of self-realization. So that's why Lord Krishna is the very first quality he talks about is amanitvam. Be humble. Be humble. It's almost like if we are looking at a mountain from a distance, that mountain seems like so small. When we get little closer, then we find out, oh, I am small. I am small. But always remember that. And unpretentiousness. The hypocrite develops an artificial external personality. External display of the hollow, skin deep attributes. Okay, so that's why he says, be careful about that. Become free from hypocrisy. Non-injury to any living being. Don't have a vicious intentions and the feelings. Physically, sure, none of us will hurt anybody. But even intention of hurting, even with our words, thoughts. Scriptures state that Atmana pratikulani paresham na samacharet. If you dislike a certain behavior in others, do not behave with them in that manner. Because ordinarily we think that if somebody is ridiculing us, we got to just attack back. Lord Krishna says, don't do it. Forgiveness, patience. capacity to suffer long without being upset, forgiveness, uprightness, arjvam or simplicity. Arjvam will come to a person who harmonizes his thoughts, words, and deeds. A person who is intent on right conduct. That is arjvam. And service to the teacher. When he says acharya upasanam, it's not just a physical, but the real service to the teacher is an attempt on the part of the student to seek a mental and intellectual identity with the teacher's pure heart and intellect. Because a teacher, a guru, has a attitude of dedication and devotion towards God. So that's what we need to cultivate. We got to do what a teacher tells us to do. That is a service to the teacher. And Shaucham, the purity, this Shaucham is not just only the external purity, internal also. So purity of the thoughts, purity of the words, sure, purity of the body and purity of the place where we live too. So the environment, our belongings, the way we dress, the way we talk. So it's like a complete purity. The next one is steadfastness. Satharium, steadiness. That means the consistency of purpose and concentration of all efforts towards achieving our ultimate goal. Because self-knowledge and God realization are not the goals which are attainable in a day or two. We need persistence. We got to learn how to stay on the path until the goal is reached. To keep that in mind. Small goals can be reached fast. But this is a supreme goal. So steadfastness and self-control. The last one he says, Atam Vinigraha, self-control, self-restraint. We got to learn how to practice that in all our personality layers, both in collective as well as separately, when we contact with this world. So it is the restraint of the mind, restraint of the senses, because senses would love to run after the mundane pleasures. They are like wild horses. And what happens is when the senses are just running in the outer world, we are dirtying our mind and intellect at the same time. So self-control, this Atam Vinigraha, prevents the dissipation of the personality through indulgence. So we stop ourselves. You can see that in simple looking verse. How much do we have over here? It's full of information which we can use to create a beautiful personality. And that kind of a personality will take us towards this knowledge of God. So we'll continue with the next verse, because I told you that there are 5 verses where he's going to give us these great ideas for our own sadhana. So again, I would like you to just write them down in your own words. Whether English or Sanskrit or Hindi, whatever language you want to write it, doesn't matter. ultimately we got to know that, hey, this is my homework. This is what I need to do. Because I do want to know, who am I? And who is the God? This relationship we need to know. And this will help us. So let's stop it here and we'll start with the next verse next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.